addition to our knowledge about how Central Asians think of themselves, of their Muslimness, okay? Because most of the research that has been available to us up to this date is based on anthropological studies, and as valuable as this research is, it has some limitations because it doesn't have that kind of cross-sectional value, and it's not based on any kind of systematic gathering of data and comparison. So I'll give you this kind of a snapshot of self-identifications of Central Asian Muslims with this faith. But the bulk of my presentation is going to look at the way the governments and media portray Islam, how they talk about Islam. And then I'm going to juxtapose individual self-representations with government's discursive representations and kind of assess implications of any kind of gaps and inconsistencies for social relations and politics in Central Asia. Okay. So, if you're interested in Islam in Central Asia or anywhere in the world, I strongly recommend you to visit this newly published report by the Pew Center. The researchers of the Pew Center conducted close to 40,000 face-to-face interviews, including almost 2,500 face-to-face interviews in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And for this study, I focused on two republics, although I'm interested in Central Asia as a whole. Okay? So I'll just use Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan as kind of my case studies. All right. And interestingly, but not surprisingly, the survey data largely supports most, if not all, of the findings of anthropologists and religious studies scholars. So we all know that the majority of believers in Central Asia self-identify themselves as Muslims. And so, for example, in the samples from Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, in Uzbekistan, close to 97% of interviewees identify themselves as Muslims. In Kazakhstan, it is a little bit less because we know that there is a significant proportion of Russians there who identify themselves with Orthodox Church. And as you probably also know, for many Muslims in Central Asia, their Muslimness is not connected to strict observance of Islamic laws and prohibitions or following all of the Islamic practices and rituals. Rather, it's derived from some other sources, including being born into the community of Muslims. Or there is also a very strong association between being Muslim and being Uzbek, or being Muslim and being Kazakh. So there is a strong association between ethnic identity and Muslim identity. So the survey, for example, found that the majority of Muslims could not even differentiate between Shia or Sunni or Sufis or any other varieties of Islam. They call themselves just Muslim. So you see the numbers, 74% in Kazakhstan identify themselves as just a Muslim. And very, very small percentages were able to identify themselves with either Shia or Sunni branch of Islam. And interestingly, that those who called themselves just Muslims, they did not believe that Shia or Sufis or Sunnis were true Muslims. Okay, I thought it was a very interesting finding as well. Both Kazakhs and less so Uzbeks are known as kind of light or moderate believers. It is largely because, like I said, there is no strict following and observance of practices of Islam. So very small percentages in all Central Asian republics pray 5 times a day, or attend mosques at least once a day, or give alms. Actually, giving alms is more prevalent across Central Asia than any other ritual or following any other pillar of Islam. Fasting during Ramadan, reading Quran, or traveling to Mecca. And it was, there were also important gender differences. Fewer women go to mosques and perform those rituals that are, that are required of all Muslims compared to men. Well, despite that kind of low level of observance of Islamic practices and rituals, or knowledge of scriptures, reading Quran or knowing what Quran says, 18% of respondents from Kazakhstan and 30% of respondents from Uzbekistan asserted that religion was still very important in their lives. Okay, and again, this next slide also supports lots of findings of anthropologists that speak to the sources. So if going to mosques or not going to mosque does not make us less of a Muslim, then what are the sources from which we derive our Muslimness? And for a lot of Muslims in Central Asia, their sources are their ethnicity, being born into the community of Muslims. And this community develops a variety of cultural rituals and traditions which over a long historical period of Islamicization of those parts of Central Asia became closely intertwined with Islamic rituals. So they became Islamicized, and now those rituals, which are not really Islamic per se, they're not considered as such by Muslims from other states, from other regions, are considered to be Muslim by Central Asian Muslims. So a lot of people in Central Asia, a lot of Muslims, for example, they wear talismans, they have objects against evil eye in their houses, or they carry those objects with themselves, like little amulets or talismans. They go to religious healers, they recite poetry in the name of God, and they also believe that visiting shrines or appealing to spirits of the deceased relatives is consistent with Islamic tradition. So there are lots of those practices which are not necessarily considered Islamic per se by more orthodox, traditional or conservative followers of Islam, are considered as acceptable or consistent with Islam by the Central Asian Muslims. So kind of to sum it up, again, the whole purpose of this kind of introduction was to, number one, point out the existence of this very valuable data that was published by Pew Center that supports volumes and volumes of research carried out by anthropologists in recent decade that show how Islam is very internally diverse in Central Asia, just like in many other parts of the world, that it manifests itself in a very vast collection of experiences, practices, and currents that range from the so-called traditional, popular, and cultural varieties to foreign and radical types of Islam. So overall, this survey data supports anthropologists and religious studies scholars' findings. And I want you to keep in mind those self-representations of Muslims in Central Asia, because now I'm going to move on to kind of the next part, how the governments, through their official websites or official texts, and by texts I mean speeches delivered to domestic and foreign audiences, or memoirs, or other speeches published by those governments. So how do the governments represent, through their discourse, Islam in Central Asia? And what I did, I downloaded all of the available addresses of President Nazarbayev delivered to the people of Kazakhstan from 2003 to 2012, and all of his speeches from 1997 to 2012, and Karimov speeches from the same period. I also use LexisNexis to get access to articles containing references to the word Islam and classified within religion and or security subject terms. And I made sure that those articles were published by non-US newspapers. Most of those articles were published by news agencies or magazines, newspapers from Central Asia and or Russia from 1992 through 2012. And then that was my first experience of using Anguilla. It is a qualitative data analysis computer software for analyzing terms in context, terms and their derivatives in context, okay? So just to give you a little bit of a better idea of what that software allowed me to do, I'll use a few illustrations. So once you download texts of speeches making references to Islam into the software, you can run a variety of searches and just look at the frequency of a term and its derivatives, the frequency of the usage of the term and its derivatives in the speeches of the governments. So what, again, this is just kind of an illustration. So I was interested in Muslim, Islam, and synonyms, and I looked at the references to Islam and its derivatives in Nazarbayev's speeches, and interestingly, in Nazarbayev's addresses, so President Nazarbayev has evaded frequent references to Islam, and especially in his speeches to the domestic audiences, he decided on the superordinate concepts of religion and faith in place of Islam. So in Nazarbayev's annual addresses delivered since 2003, the term Islam and its derivatives were used only 11 times. So so the first figure stands for how many times the actual term is used. The second number is the word plus derivatives or synonyms. And it gives me also a kind of a weighted percentage compared to the other words. And you can also get a kind of a visual. So this is called a word cloud, and these are the illustrations from not the addresses but speeches from 1997 through 2012. You can see that in speeches on a variety of topics, not just the addresses, the annual addresses delivered to people. Nazarbayev did use Islam and Islamic more frequently, but it's clear that the themes or the topics of development and progress are much more conspicuous than references to religion, faith, and Islam. And overall, I've read all of the speeches. The Kazakh president has not been describing his state as Islamic or Muslim at all. In the references or speeches of President Karimov, Islam is present. Also, I only put 100 most frequently cited words, okay, in those word clouds. So you can see that Islam is there, but again, it's not nearly as conspicuous as development, Uzbekistan as a country, the place of Uzbekistan in the world, international relations or foreign policy of Uzbekistan, security. I also highlighted security in both, in the rhetoric of both the Kazakh government and Uzbek government. Security, the topic of security is very prominent. All right. So again, those were just illustrations so that you get an idea of how the software works. Now, in the remainder of the presentation, I'm going to give you kind of a snapshot of the kind of themes I was able to identify on the basis of my analysis of those speeches and texts. And I'm going to present only the texts that I uploaded from LexisNexis. And what I did, I identified a total of almost 4,000 references to Islam and its derivatives in the rhetoric of the Kazakh government, the president, security security services, prime minister, not prime minister, the head of the government, or the chief mufti, okay? And in the case of Uzbekistan, I analyzed close to 4,500 references. And so what this figure shows is, how prevalent various themes are in the official discourses of the Kazakh and Uzbek government. And the red columns represent Kazakhstan's discourse, while the brownish ones, they represent Uzbekistan's discourse. Okay, so as this graph clearly shows that the main theme that emerged from my analysis of the discourse, official discourse in these two states, is that Islam is a threat. And I should make a note that I excluded all references to Andijan, okay, because it would have inflated my findings considerably. So I excluded all references to Andijan. There was a lot of rhetoric in reference to the events in Andijan. So I excluded them and would have added 100 plus references to Uzbekistan's rhetoric. But the rhetoric of presidents and officials from these states frequently situates Islam in close proximity to remarks about security, threats, and terrorist and extremist danger. Okay? It also includes descriptions of attacks or threats of terrorist violence. In particular, the statements of security services, they've been inundated with the discourse of Islamic danger. Just to give you some examples, so this is the quotes from various texts. Foreign terrorist groups are active in Kazakhstan. Wahhabis pose the greatest threat to our country. South Kazakhstan is the most suitable place for various extremist elements. Now, this is just some of the examples that are emblematic of the rhetoric. And overall, the references to this theme of Islam as a threat are consistent with political developments in the region. So, when you have a terrorist attack, for example, in Kazakhstan, bombings in 1997, then bombings in 2004, or Batken events of 1999, and then other Islamist incursions in 2000 when Islamists tried to penetrate Uzbekistan using Kyrgyzstan's territory. So you can see an increase in this rhetoric portraying Islam as a threat during those periods. And then, of course, the presidents and security services, they talk a lot about the importance of counterterrorism cooperation, either at the regional level or being the members of this, the coalition, of the global coalition that fights the global war on terrorism. Then moving on to the third, so counterterrorism regional cooperation. Then cooperation with other Muslim states. That was an interesting theme that emerged in the rhetoric of the Kazakh president, especially since 2010, because Kazakhstan has been trying to present itself as a leader of the Islamic banking and financing. So in Kazakhstan's discourse in particular, there have been lots of references to, Islam as a force that can be harnessed for economic progress, and kind of the Kazakh government really capitalized on this theme, trying to present Kazakhstan as the leader on the post-Soviet states in creating the environment, creating legislative environment that will allow for this Islamic and Islamic banking and financing take place. Oh, then the next thing is traditional Islam, the kind of Islam that exhibits, and I quote, a harmonious accord between the great teaching and the Kazakh or Uzbek own traditions and customs. It is the true Islam which possesses the unifying force and advocates peace, mercy, and respect for other religions. It is tolerant and consistent with both historical and modern democratic tradition. So this true, real, pure Islam does not preach to take arms, fight, kill others, violate the law, and go against the state, but promote tolerance and contributes to spiritual renewal of either Kazakh or Uzbek people. And another interesting theme is that when the Kazakh president or Uzbek president talk about this real, authentic, tolerant, peaceful variety of Islam, they also add that this kind of Islam encourages support for the motherland and furthers allegiance to state. That was kind of an interesting nuance that I discerned in multiple references to this Islam, which is a part of culture, tradition, and moral fabric of the Kazakh and Uzbek societies. Okay, and a few other themes. Okay, so Islam as a source of unity. Frequent references are made to Islam as a source of unity and an instrument of consolidation of very diverse ethnic groups under the umbrella of one state. So you have this Islam as a threat, and this theme is juxtaposed to an attempt of the government to decouple Islam and terrorism. And I think it's done as a way of, allaying people's concerns that there is a threat domestically. So whenever there is a reference to Islam as a threat, usually this threat is discursively connected to some external sources and forces, Afghanistan, Pakistan, some other Arab states, and less frequently, but nonetheless still prevalently, references are made to Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. So yes, Islam is a threat, but sources of this threat are outside of our territories. They are elsewhere. And domestically, the government is trying to present themselves as kind of the bastions, the protectors against this evil, dangerous, threatening varieties of Islam. So everything is good, our authentic, real, pure, whatever, cultural Islam does not pose a threat, okay? And so there's this effort at decoupling Islam and terrorism, especially in Kazakhstan. Government support for Islam. Lots of times the government will talk about how it passes legislation, that it codifies traditional Islamic holidays as national holidays, talking about the government's efforts to build or support educational initiatives or build educational centers teaching Islam, or reconstruct or build Islamic sites. So government support for Islam. Kazakhstan has also tried to present themselves as the leader in Islamic world, taking initiative, like I said, in Islamic financing and banking, and also create an image of a modern, democratic, and secular state, again, by trying to separate authentic, cultural, pure, tolerant Islam that is a part of Kazakhstan's cultural heritage and history from the foreign Islam that is inimical to the Kazakh nation that the Kazakh government decided to join arms with, the coalitional forces to fight. All right. So this is kind of a very brief summary of what themes I found. Now, so this is what's happening there, and this is what I'm really fascinated with, and this is what I study as a political scientist. So on the one hand, Islam is traditional. It's cultural, authentic, real, pure, a-religious, apolitical. Really, when the government talks about this real, pure Islam, this Islam has no religious content whatsoever. Especially in the context of Uzbekistan, it's almost tantamount to some moral values or some traits of character of Uzbek Muslims. So it's tantamount to Uzbeks being benevolent, hospitable, etc., etc. So it has no religious content whatsoever. Then there is official Islam, which is also apolitical. It is supported and overseen by the state and religious administration. Then there is foreign Islam that is dangerous, radical, also irreligious, and intolerant, moderate. So this is what I call, so what's going on here? It's all these various discursive representations. This is what I call as instrumentalization of Islam. So instrumentalization of Islam, it is the process whereby the governments, use various discursive representations of the religion, which is amenable to various interpretations for accomplishing various political purposes and aims. So instrumentalization of Islam becomes political currency that the governments use out of political expediency. So it's the various discursive presentations of Islam, ways of packaging it with themes of danger or culture, descriptions for various emotional appeal and connotations, and positioning the issue of Islam in different ideological contexts for accomplishing distinctive political aims. And so what I try to do is to come up with some sort of a classificatory scheme or a framework, okay? And it's, again, it's just for the purpose of simplifying this very messy picture of various discursive representations and uses of those discursive representations for political purposes. So what I see based on my analysis of discourse is as follows. Again, these are not kind of exclusive or all-encompassing categories or presentations of Islam, and these are not exclusive or all-encompassing uses of Islam, but I thought, this is a good starting point. So the governments, when they talk about traditional, authentic, cultural Islam, what they're trying to do is to create a sense of national unity. So they appeal to some sort of core values that unite all Muslims, and they're not even bothered by identifying exactly what those values, core values that supposedly all Muslims in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan share. Okay, they just make this reference to some traditional cultural, authentic Islam. So religion becomes a matter of collective rather than individual choice. And interestingly, in 2011, the Agency of Religious Affairs of Kazakhstan even proposed the concept and development of moderate Islam in Kazakhstan, premised on the idea of one nation, one religion. And it has been used as a pretext for deterring the so-called dangerous practices of building mosques along ethnic lines. As you probably know, in all Central Asian republics, there have been attempts at building religious sites or mosques or madrasas. So Uzbeks want to have their own Uzbek muftis because they believe that the Kazakhs are just nominal believers. They don't have the same kind of level of religiosity and knowledge of religion. And a lot of Uzbeks in the south of Kazakhstan actually prefer to travel to Uzbekistan for major prayers if the mosques are run by the Kazakh muftis or imams. Okay, so that's one political use. Then by presenting Islam as official, apolitical, the governments are legitimizing their attempts at regulating religious practices. All governments set up councils of religious affairs within the structure of their executive branch of power for exercising control over religious life, but also exercise a lot of control over the official muftiates. So the instrumentalization of Islam, especially through the creation of dichotomous categories, official, unofficial, radical, and traditional, has provided the governments with the necessary context for institutionalizing state control and formalizing.
If you use the word Islam over 100 times.
It's only a 10.
Oh, it's only turn that alert off because it's going to give me a migraine.
100 times.
This is only a 10.
Alright, and so by presenting some varieties of Islam as foreign and
The
radical,
public address system. This is only.
Well timed.
so when they talk about
Using this system. This is only a test.
okay.
10.
So by talking about Islam, like foreign, radical, dangerous
This is only.
varieties of Islam, the governments essentially, they freed their hands for
This concludes the test.
prosecutions, imprisonments, detainments of the so-called, Islamists, which do not necessarily who do not necessarily pose any kind of threat to the regimes. Because in all of the Central Asian states, although in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan there is still some secular opposition, but in Uzbekistan in particular, only religious challengers pose some sort of opposition to the regime of President Karimov. So by instrumentalizing Islam and creating, when you look at the language that the government used, when they talk about those threatening varieties of Islam, they refer to guerrillas terrorizing the states. And then, so it kind of desynthesizes them, and they say it's all those references to guerrillas, then paired up with terms like annihilate Islamic rebels, to destroy all of the militants. So it kind of gives them green light to use warlike measures, kind of very inhuman measures that the governments utilize to combat the threat of radical and foreign Islam. And one more thing, so by making references to these foreign radical varieties of Islam, the governments are also kind of trying to shift the blame for a variety of social, political, economic evils and issues onto them. So like when you read the text, it's oftentimes like, it's not that we don't want to contribute to economic development or social development and welfare. We are trying our best, but our efforts and resources are getting diverted because we have this danger, this threat that we have to deal with. Blaming these radical Islamic groups for all sorts of evils that their societies and states experience. Modern Islam creating positive image. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm just gonna go on to and talk a little bit about implications of this phenomenon of instrumentalization of Islam. So what? So clearly there is a discrepancy between Muslims' self-representations or self-identifications and official presentations of Islam. But I think that this gap has been narrowing, has been closing because the official discourse almost like dumbing down the religion. When they talk about traditional cultural, they really deprive it of any kind of religious content, making it tantamount to something just part of culture, part of tradition, part of the national character. So it discourages the pursuit of religious knowledge and education. So all of the educational institutions that are set up, supported, and controlled by the government, they really, I don't think they necessarily do like that good of a job, or that they can be effective in engaging in any kind of discourse, contestation or disputes, discussion with the kind of the orthodox, traditional, conservative Muslims that practice religion outside of the government's confines. So that's one consequence. It also shows that there is no Islam, just like there is no Christianity or any kind of religion. To me, is intrinsically manipulable. So instrumentalization demonstrates intrinsic manipulability of religion and how it can be used as a powerful ideological tool that can be used to mobilize audiences by Islamists or governments alike. So governments can utilize Islam as a readily available ideology that provides legitimacy to their political decisions, especially those involving the use of repression. So it's a very, very powerful legitimization tool. It's a soft power tool. Any kind of power needs some techniques of legitimization to perpetuate, maintain itself, and instrumentalization of Islam kind of provides governments with this opportunity to use various representations of Islam for legitimizing themselves, their policies, and the use of repression. By delegitimizing bad Islam, the governments exonerate themselves of criticisms and responsibility. So we're not really doing anything wrong. The only thing we're doing is we are trying to liquidate, annihilate that bad, threatening. We're actually doing what the rest of the world is doing. We are just part of this global coalition that fights the evil force, terrorism. The inevitable fallout of the instrumentalization of Islam is the growing authoritarianisms of Central Asian governments, ineffective social and religious policies, and continued disrespect for people's civil and political rights. And instrumentalization of religion cloaks the exact nature of the threat that the governments face, and this is something that I personally am very interested in. So the discourse of Islamic danger becomes a dangerous discourse. So, by presenting something that does not constitute a threat as a threat, it becomes a self-perpetuating prophecy. There is no threat, but we talk about it as a threat, and then we start believing in it and treating it as a threat, responding to it as a threat. And a lot of studies of the impact of repression shows that if it's not a targeted one, sooner or later, it's going to create a lashback, and the Islamists who may be driven underground to begin with, sooner or later will come out and rise. And Kazakhstan, unsurprisingly, has witnessed recently a number of the so-called terrorist attacks or attempts at challenging the government that it had not seen before until 2011, 2012. And to me, it is somehow related to the way the government spoke about and has spoken about and dealt with this phenomenon of Islam. Okay, and I'm gonna stop here because I want to leave some time for questions.
I have one. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan,